The blood-red horizon swallowed the sun as Zara Kaplan clutched the crumpled telegram in her trembling hands. For the third time that day, she read the words that had shattered her world. Her husband of 2 years was dead, killed in a mining accident near Silver Creek. Now, standing on the dusty platform of Redemption Springs in 1885, with nothing but a small trunk of belongings and the deed to a property she'd never seen, Zara wondered if the long journey from Boston had been a terrible mistake. "Madam, you look like you could use some assistance." The deep voice startled her from her thoughts. She turned to find a tall man with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His clothes were dusty from the trail, but the silver star pinned to his vest identified him as the local law. "Sheriff." Zara inquired, hastily wiping a tear from her cheek. "Owen Quinn, at your service," he said with a slight bow. "And you would be—" "Zara Kaplan, widow of James Kaplan." The word widow still felt foreign on her tongue. "I've come to claim my husband's homestead." Sheriff Quinn's expression shifted subtly. "The Kaplan place, that's nearly 15 miles outside of town, Mrs. Kaplan. Not exactly hospitable country for a woman alone." Zara straightened her spine, meeting his gaze directly. "I didn't travel 2,000 miles to be deterred by 15 more, Sheriff. I'll manage." A slight smile tugged at the corner of Owen's mouth as he tipped his hat. "I don't doubt your determination, madam, but nightfall's coming. The stage coach to Silver Creek doesn't leave until morning." "May I suggest a room at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house for the night?" Zara glanced at her meager funds and nodded reluctantly. "I suppose that would be wise." As Sheriff Quinn lifted her trunk with ease, Zara couldn't help noticing the way his presence seemed to command respect from the townsfolk they passed. Several nodded in greeting, and even the rowdy men outside the saloon quieted as he walked by. "How long have you been sheriff here, Mr. Quinn?" she asked, trying to distract herself from the weight of grief that had been her constant companion since receiving the telegram. "Going on 5 years now," he replied, leading her down the main street. "Came here chasing a different life after the war. And did you find it?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Parts of it. Redemption Springs has a way of giving people what they need, even if it's not what they thought they wanted." The boarding house was a 2-story clapboard building with lace curtains and flower boxes that seemed out of place in the rough-hewn town. Mrs. Henderson, a plump woman with kind eyes, welcomed Zara warmly and showed her to a small but clean room. "Supper's at 6, she informed Zara. "Nothing fancy, but it's hot and there's plenty." Alone in the room, Zara finally allowed herself to collapse onto the bed, the weight of her journey and grief crushing down on her. James had been gone only 3 months, but it felt like a lifetime. Their marriage had been one of convenience rather than passion. She, the daughter of a failed businessman with mounting debts, and he, an ambitious young man who needed a wife to help secure a government land grant. When James left for the territories, promising to send for her once he'd built something worthwhile, Zara had been relieved at the reprieve. Now, she was alone in a strange land with nothing but painful memories and uncertain prospects. She pulled out the locket containing James's portrait and studied his solemn face. They had been fond of each other, but love, that was a luxury neither of them had allowed themselves to expect. "What am I doing here, James?" she whispered to the empty room. The only answer was the distant piano music drifting from the saloon down the street. At supper, Zara met the other boarders, a schoolteacher named Miss Abigail, an elderly shopkeeper, Mr. Wilson, and a traveling salesman who couldn't stop talking about the miraculous properties of his hair tonic. Sheriff Quinn joined them, having been invited by Mrs. Henderson, who clearly harbored maternal feelings toward the lawman. "Sheriff's been keeping this town decent long enough that we've almost forgotten what trouble looks like," Mrs. Henderson announced proudly as she served a hearty beef stew. "Mrs. Henderson gives me too much credit," Owen replied. "This town's good people are what keep it decent." "Will you be staying with us long, Mrs. Kaplan?" Miss Abigail inquired. Zara shook her head. "I'll be leaving for my husband's homestead tomorrow. He passed recently, and I've come to see to the property." A hush fell over the table. It was Mr. Wilson who broke it. "James Kaplan from the Silver Creek mine collapse." "Yes," Zara confirmed, her throat tight. "Did you know him?" "Not personally," the old man replied. "But the mine collapse was big news around here. 12 men lost. The company claims it was an accident, but..." He trailed off, glancing at Sheriff Quinn, but some folks think otherwise, Owen finished, his expression guarded. There have been rumors about the safety conditions at Silver Creek for months. Zara felt a chill. What kind of rumors? The kind that powerful men prefer to keep quiet, Owen said carefully. The kind that got your husband and several others killed when they tried to speak up about them. James never mentioned any troubles in his letters, Zara said, though as she spoke, she recalled his last letter had mentioned complications with the mine owners. She'd assumed it was just business matters. Men often shield their women from worry, Mrs. Henderson said gently. Especially when they're far away. After dinner, Sheriff Quinn offered to escort Zara on a short walk to help settle her meal. The evening was cool and the stars were beginning to emerge in the vast desert sky. I hope our talk of the mine didn't distress you, Owen said as they strolled past the shuttered shops. I've had little but distress these past months, Sheriff. The truth, however painful, is preferable to comfortable lies. He nodded appreciatively. That's a rare quality, Mrs. Kaplan. Please call me Zara. Mrs. Kaplan feels like a stranger's name now. Zara, then. He smiled, and something in his expression made her heart flutter unexpectedly. I'm sorry about your husband. From what little I knew of him, he seemed a decent man. He was, Zara agreed, though she felt a strange guilt at how little grief she truly felt. She had respected James, had been grateful for the chance at a new start their marriage had offered, but love, that had never been part of their arrangement. Tomorrow I'll arrange for someone reliable to take you to your property, Owen said. The trail can be dangerous for those who don't know it. That's very kind, but I couldn't impose. It's no imposition, he insisted. In fact, I've been meaning to ride that way myself. There's been reports of cattle rustling near Silver Creek. Zara suspected this was a convenient excuse, but she was grateful nonetheless. The prospect of traveling alone to an unknown homestead was more daunting than she cared to admit. As they turned back toward the boarding house, a commotion from the saloon caught their attention. A man stumbled out, clearly intoxicated, followed by angry shouts. Wait here, Owen instructed, his hand moving instinctively to the gun at his hip as he strode toward the disturbance. Zara watched as he effortlessly diffused the situation, speaking calmly to the drunk man while keeping the angry saloon patron at bay. There was something compelling about his quiet authority, the way he commanded respect without resorting to threats or violence. When he returned to her side, she found herself seeing him differently, not just as a helpful lawman, but as a man of principle and compassion. Does this happen often? She asked as they resumed their walk. Often enough to keep me employed, he said with a wry smile. But it's usually just high spirits and whiskey talking. Real trouble's rare these days. At the boarding house door, Owen removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair with just a touch of silver at the temples. I'll come for you at 8 tomorrow morning if that suits. That would be fine, thank you. Zara hesitated, then added, Sheriff Quinn, what should I expect? At the homestead, I mean. His expression softened with something like sympathy. Your husband had just started building when the accident happened. There's a cabin from what I understand, but it's likely rough. The land has potential, though good water, decent soil. Zara nodded, trying to picture the place that was now her only possession in the world. Good night, Sheriff. Good night, Zara. Rest well. Sleep came fitfully that night, her dreams filled with collapsing mine shafts and the faces of men she'd never met. In one particularly vivid dream, James stood before her, trying to tell her something important, but his voice was drowned out by the sound of falling rock. She awoke before dawn, her nightgown damp with sweat. As the first gray light filtered through the curtains, Zara dressed in her most practical traveling outfit, a dark blue skirt and white blouse, with a sturdy jacket for the cool morning. She pinned her long auburn hair into a simple bun and packed her few belongings. By the time she joined the others for breakfast, she had composed herself, though Mrs. Henderson still clucked worriedly over her pale complexion. You need more meat on your bones, child, the landlady insisted, piling Zara's plate with eggs and bacon. The western air takes it out of you if you're not properly fed. Zara ate obediently, knowing she would need her strength for the journey ahead. As promised, Sheriff Quinn arrived promptly at 8, leading 2 horses, his own powerful bay gelding and a gentle-looking mare. I hope you can ride, he said, eyeing her city clothes with slight concern. I grew up on a small farm in Pennsylvania, Zara assured him. I may be out of practice, but I won't embarrass myself. Owen's approval was evident as he helped her mount the mare. Her name's Daisy, she's steady and forgiving of mistakes. The ride out of town gave Zara her first real look at the landscape of her new home. The terrain was unlike anything she had known in the east, vast stretches of rugged beauty, punctuated by mesas and strange rock formations, with mountains looming in the distance. Despite her apprehension about what lay ahead, she couldn't help but be moved by the wild grandeur of it all. It's beautiful, she breathed as they crested a rise that revealed a panoramic vista. It grows on you, Owen agreed. When I first arrived, I thought it was the most desolate place I'd ever seen. Now I can't imagine living anywhere else. Where did you come from? Zara asked, curious about the man who had so readily come to her aid. Virginia, originally. My family had a small tobacco farm, lost it all in the war. His tone was matter-of-fact, but Zara sensed deeper currents beneath the simple statement. You fought for the Confederacy, she ventured. I did, he acknowledged. Not for slavery, my family never owned slaves, but because it was my home, doesn't make it right. He was quiet for a moment before adding, after Appomattox, there wasn't much left for me there. I drifted west, tried my hand at ranching, prospecting, even drove cattle for a spell. Ended up with a badge almost by accident. Zara appreciated his honesty. Many men would have either boasted about their war record or denied it completely. And you found peace here. Most days, he said with a slight smile. Though peace in a frontier town is always provisional. As they rode, Owen pointed out landmarks and shared bits of local knowledge where the best water could be found, which plants were medicinal, which trails to avoid. Zara listened carefully, knowing such information could be vital for her survival. By midday, the sun was high and merciless. They stopped in the shade of a rocky outcrop to rest the horses and eat the lunch Mrs. Henderson had packed for them: thick sandwiches, apples, and a jar of sweet tea. We're about halfway there, Owen informed her as they ate. Your land sits in a small valley just beyond that ridge. He pointed to a distant line of hills. Zara nodded, trying to quell the anxiety rising in her chest. Soon she would face the reality of her new life. Sheriff Owen, he corrected her. Out here, sheriff feels too formal. Owen, then, she smiled briefly. I appreciate your escorting me, but I can't help wondering why you've taken such an interest in my welfare. He considered her question, taking a long drink from his canteen before answering. Your husband was trying to do the right thing when he died. The mine owners have been cutting corners on safety to increase profits. James and some others were organizing the miners to demand better conditions. Zara's breath caught. You're saying his death wasn't an accident? Owen's expression was grave. I'm saying there are powerful interests in this territory who wouldn't hesitate to sacrifice men's lives for profit. I can't prove anything, but the timing of that collapse, right after your husband and others threatened to bring in government inspectors. He shook his head. It's troubling. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know. And because I want you to understand that you might face resistance if you decide to stay and work that land. The same people who didn't want miners organizing don't want independent homesteaders competing with their cattle interests either. Fear and indignation warred within Zara. Are you suggesting I should sell and leave? No, Owen said firmly. I'm suggesting you go in with your eyes open and know that not everyone will be as welcoming as Mrs. Henderson. Zara straightened her shoulders. I've faced adversity before, Sheriff Quinn. I won't be intimidated from what's rightfully mine. A slow smile spread across his face. I had a feeling you'd say something like that. They resumed their journey, the conversation turning to lighter topics as they rode. Owen told her about the colorful characters of Redemption Springs, and Zara shared stories of her childhood on the Pennsylvania farm before her father's failed business ventures had driven them to the city. As the afternoon waned, they finally crested the ridge that overlooked Zara's property. She reined in her horse, taking in the sight below. The valley was small but picturesque, with a creek winding through it and patches of good grazing land. Near the creek stood a rough cabin, its chimney rising hopefully against the backdrop of hills. It's smaller than I imagined, Zara admitted, her heart sinking slightly at the modest structure. But the foundation is solid, Owen pointed out, and the land is good, better than most in these parts. They rode down into the valley, and as they approached the cabin, Zara could see that while it was indeed rough, it had been built with care. The logs were well fitted, the roof appeared sound, and there was even a small covered porch across the front. Owen helped her dismount and tied their horses to a hitching post before the cabin. Zara stood for a moment, gathering her courage, then walked up the 2 steps to the door. It wasn't locked. Few doors were in this part of the country and swung open at her touch. The interior was sparse but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a small table and 2 chairs placed nearby. A curtained alcove presumably contained a bed, and various shelves held basic cooking implements and supplies. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust. "He was building something for you," Owen said softly from the doorway. Zara ran her fingers along the table's edge, noticing the careful craftsmanship. "I never asked him to." "Men often do things they aren't asked to do," he replied with a slight smile, "especially for women they care about." Zara felt a twinge of guilt. Had James truly cared for her that way? Their arrangement had been practical from the beginning, but perhaps he had harbored deeper feelings than she'd realized. While Owen checked the small stable behind the cabin, Zara examined her new home more thoroughly. She found a chest containing some of James's clothes and personal effects, including a journal. She set it aside to read later, not wanting to delve into such private thoughts while Owen was nearby. Outside, she discovered a small vegetable garden, now overgrown but salvageable, and a chicken coop, though no chickens remained. The creek provided clear, sweet water, and the surrounding land offered both grazing for livestock and potential for crops. "It's a good piece of land," Owen confirmed when he returned from the stable. James chose well. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the valley. Zara realized with sudden clarity that Owen would soon leave, and she would be truly alone for the first time in her life. "I should be getting back," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "But I don't like the idea of leaving you here alone on your first night." "I'll be fine," Zara insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. "I have a roof and supplies. What more does one need?" Owen looked skeptical. "At least let me get a fire started for you before I go. The nights get cold, even in summer." As he busied himself building a fire in the hearth, Zara found herself watching the efficient movements of his hands, the way the fading light caught in his hair. There was something comforting about his presence that she wasn't ready to lose. "Stay for supper," she heard herself say. Mrs. Henderson packed more than enough food. Owen paused, clearly weighing the propriety of the invitation against practical concerns. "It would be full dark before I could make it back to town," he mused, "and there have been those reports of rustlers." "Then it's settled," Zara said, more confidently than she felt. "I'll prepare the meal while you tend to the horses." By the time Owen returned from ensuring the horses were secure for the night, Zara had set out a simple but satisfying meal of cold chicken, bread, and preserved peaches from Mrs. Henderson's generously packed basket. They ate by firelight, the dancing flames casting a warm glow over the rustic interior. Outside, the chorus of night insects had begun their evening symphony, punctuated occasionally by the distant howl of a coyote. "What will you do now?" Owen asked as they finished their meal. "Will you try to work the land yourself?" Zara had been pondering this very question throughout the journey. "I have little choice. My funds are limited and I have nowhere else to go." James managed to acquire some stock before he died, a few head of cattle and some chickens, according to his letters, though I see no sign of them now. "Neighbors likely took them in after the accident," Owen suggested. "Folk around here look after each other's interests." "I can ask around, help you recover what's yours." "Thank you," Zara said, genuinely touched by his continued willingness to assist her. "I know nothing about ranching, but I'm not afraid of hard work. I can learn." "It's a hard life for anyone, let alone a woman alone," Owen cautioned. "Most widows in your position would sell and return east." Zara's chin lifted slightly. "I have nothing to return to. Besides, I've spent my whole life doing what was expected of me, being a dutiful daughter, a practical wife. Perhaps it's time I did something because I choose to, however difficult." Owen studied her across the table, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. You're not what I expected, Zara Kaplan. What did you expect? Someone broken by grief, perhaps. Someone seeking the easiest path forward. Love brings pain, Zara said softly, thinking not just of James but of her parents, whose passionate but volatile relationship had ended in heartbreak when her mother died. I learned that lesson young. It's easier not to invest too much of oneself. Owen's smile was gentle but knowing. Then I'll teach you it brings healing too. The words hung between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Zara busied herself clearing away their meal, suddenly aware of how intimate the small cabin felt with just the two of them. I'll sleep in the stable, Owen said, sensing her discomfort. The hay loft should be comfortable enough. Are you certain? I could make a pallet here by the fire. I've slept in far worse conditions, he assured her. Besides, it wouldn't be proper otherwise. Zara nodded, both relieved and oddly disappointed. After checking that the fire was safely banked for the night, Owen bid her good night and stepped out into the darkness. Alone in the cabin, Zara changed into her nightgown and slipped behind the curtain to the small bed. The mattress was stuffed with fresh straw, surprisingly comfortable, and the blankets smelled faintly of cedar. As she settled in, her hand brushed against James's journal, which she had placed on the bedside table. Lighting a small oil lamp, she opened the journal, both curious and apprehensive about what she might discover. The first entries were practical lists of supplies purchased, notes on land conditions, plans for building the cabin. But as she read on, she found more personal reflections. Wrote to Zara again today, one entry read. I wonder if she misses me as I find myself missing her. Our arrangement was never based on affection, but I confess that her quiet dignity and sharp mind have grown in my estimation during our separation. Zara felt a pang of guilt. While James had apparently been developing deeper feelings, she had been relieved by the distance between them. She read on, finding more evidence of his growing attachment to her, along with his hopes for their future together. The final entries concerned the troubles at the mine, dangerous conditions, men injured by preventable accidents, the mine owner's callous disregard for safety. James described meetings with other miners, plans to demand improvements, and finally, a confrontation with the mine supervisor the day before the collapse. Matthews threatened us all with dismissal if we persist, James had written. But Hargrove says he knows a government inspector who can be here within the month. We cannot back down now, though I fear the consequences. If anything should happen to me, I pray that Zara will find happiness, perhaps in a way our practical union could never provide. Tears blurred Zara's vision as she closed the journal. James had been a better man than she had given him credit for, and he had died trying to protect others. Whatever their marriage had lacked in passion, she could honor his memory by preserving what he had worked to build. With this resolve firm in her heart, Zara extinguished the lamp and lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness around her. Despite her determination, a flutter of fear crept in as the night deepened. The cabin's walls suddenly seemed thin protection against the vast unknown that surrounded her. She must have eventually drifted off, for she awoke with a start to the sound of a horse's panicked whinny. Moonlight streamed through the single window, casting silver patterns on the floor. Another sound followed, a man's voice, low and threatening, then another answering. Fear clutched at Zara's heart as she slipped from the bed and hurriedly pulled on her dress over her nightgown. She crept to the window and peered out, careful to stay hidden behind the curtain. In the moonlight, she could make out 3 men by the stable. 2 were strangers, rough-looking men with bandanas covering the lower half of their faces. The third was Owen, his hands raised in a gesture of compliance as one of the men pointed a revolver at his chest. "This ain't your business, Sheriff," the armed man was saying. "You ride back to town and forget what you saw, and nobody gets hurt." "I can't do that, Davis," Owen replied, his voice steady despite the gun aimed at him. "You and Matthews have gone too far this time." Zara's breath caught. Matthews, the same mine supervisor James had mentioned in his journal. These men must be connected to the mine owners. "This land belongs to the lady fair and square," the second man argued. "Boss wants it, and what the boss wants he gets." "The law says otherwise," Owen countered. "And I represent the law in these parts." The armed man Davis laughed harshly. "Law don't reach this far from town, Sheriff. Accidents happen out here all the time, just like that mine collapse. So her suspicions were confirmed. James's death had been no accident. Anger surged through Zara, temporarily displacing her fear. She glanced around the cabin, looking for anything that might serve as a weapon. Her gaze fell on James's hunting rifle, mounted on brackets above the fireplace. Moving as quietly as possible, she retrieved the rifle and checked if it was loaded. To her relief, it was. Though it had been years since she'd fired a gun, her father had taught her the basics on their farm. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Zara crept to the door and eased it open just enough to see the confrontation by the stable. The men's attention was fully focused on Owen, who was doing his best to talk them down. "Think about what you're doing, Davis," Owen was saying. "Murder of a peace officer is a hanging offense. Even Matthews can't protect you from that." "Who says they'll ever find your body?" Davis sneered, cocking his revolver. Zara knew she had to act now. She stepped onto the porch, raising the rifle to her shoulder. "But they'll certainly find yours," she called out, her voice remarkably steady despite her racing heart. "Drop your weapons, gentlemen, or I'll be forced to demonstrate that Pennsylvania farm girls learn to shoot before they learn to sew." The men whirled toward her, clearly startled by her appearance. In that moment of distraction, Owen moved with lightning speed, drawing his own weapon and disarming Davis with a well-placed strike to his wrist. The second man reached for his gun, but froze when he found himself facing both Owen's revolver and Zara's rifle. "Wise decision," Owen commented dryly. "Now, both of you on your knees, hands behind your heads." As the men reluctantly complied, Owen quickly bound their wrists with leather straps from the stable. Only when they were securely tied did Zara allow herself to lower the rifle, her hands suddenly shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline. Owen approached her, concern evident in his face. "Are you all right?" Zara nodded, not trusting her voice. She had never threatened another human being before, and the experience had left her shaken. "You showed remarkable courage," he said gently, taking the rifle from her trembling hands. "Most people would have hidden inside." "I couldn't let them hurt you," she replied simply. Something shifted in Owen's expression, a softening, a recognition. "You're full of surprises, Zara Kaplan." After securing the prisoners in the stable, Owen returned to the cabin with Zara. Dawn was approaching, casting a pearly light across the valley. "Those men work for Richard Matthews, the mine supervisor," Owen explained as they sat at the table. "He also represents the cattle interests that have been trying to push out small homesteaders like your husband." "James wrote about him in his journal," Zara confirmed. "He suspected Matthews was behind the dangerous conditions at the mine. I've been trying to build a case against him for months, but he's protected by powerful people in the territorial government." Owen ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "With these two, though, we might finally have evidence of his methods. What will happen now? I'll take them back to town, lock them up, and wire the federal marshal in Santa Fe. This goes beyond local jurisdiction now. Attempted murder of a peace officer, conspiracy, possibly multiple counts of murder if we can connect them to the mine collapse." Zara nodded, relieved that justice might finally be served for James and the other miners. But another concern weighed on her mind. "And what of this place? Will they send others?" "Likely not right away," Owen said thoughtfully. "Matthews will be busy covering his tracks once he learns his men have been captured, but eventually." He hesitated. "Zara, it might not be safe for you to stay here alone, at least for now." "I won't be driven from my land by threats," she said firmly. "I admire your spirit, but this isn't about courage, it's about practical reality. Matthews has more men at his disposal, and the next time we might not be so fortunate." Zara knew he was right, but the thought of abandoning James's dream, and now, potentially, her own was painful. "What do you suggest, then?" "Return to town with me. Stay at the boarding house while we sort this out. Once Matthews is dealt with, you can return here with proper protection, hired hands, neighbors who will look out for you." It was the sensible course of action, Zara had to admit. "Very well," she agreed reluctantly, "but I will return. This is my home now." Owen smiled, and there was something in his expression that made her heart flutter strangely. "I never doubted that for a moment." The journey back to Redemption Springs was tense, with the two prisoners riding double behind Owen and Zara. Word of their arrival spread quickly through the small town, and by the time they reached the sheriff's office, a small crowd had gathered. "What's this about, Sheriff?" called one man as Owen led the prisoners inside. "Justice," Owen replied simply, but his meaning was clear to those who had lost friends or family in the mine collapse. After securing the prisoners, Owen sent a telegram to the federal marshal and then escorted Zara back to Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. The landlady was beside herself with worry and relief. "Land's sakes, child, when the sheriff didn't return last night, I feared the worst," she exclaimed, ushering Zara inside. "And now I hear there was trouble. You poor dear, you must be exhausted." Zara allowed herself to be fussed over, too weary to protest. The events of the past 24 hours had drained her completely. Mrs. Henderson prepared a hot bath for her and served a hearty meal in her room, clucking sympathetically over Zara's ordeal. "The sheriff's a good man, Mrs. Henderson commented as she collected Zara's empty plate. "Best thing that ever happened to this town. If anyone can sort out this business with Matthews and his ilk, it's Owen Quinn." "He was very brave," Zara agreed, remembering how calmly he had faced down the armed men. "And you, my dear, must have been brave as well," the older woman said with a knowing smile. "The sheriff said you were instrumental in apprehending those villains." Zara blushed slightly. "I merely did what was necessary." Mrs. Henderson replied, her expression suggesting she understood more than Zara had said. "Well, rest now. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." Alone in her room, Zara found herself thinking of Owen, his quiet strength, his unwavering principles, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. It was inappropriate, she knew, to harbor such thoughts so soon after her husband's death. Yet she couldn't deny the connection she felt to the sheriff, a connection that went beyond gratitude for his assistance. "Love brings pain," she reminded herself softly. Her parents' tumultuous relationship, ending with her mother's early death and her father's subsequent decline into bitter despair, had taught her that lesson well. Even James, who had begun to care for her more deeply than their arrangement required, had found only suffering as his reward. Yet Owen's words echoed in her mind, "Then I'll teach you it brings healing too." Could that be possible? Or was it merely a comforting fantasy? Sleep claimed her before she could resolve these questions, and her dreams were a confused blend of danger and rescue, loss and hope. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. The federal marshal arrived from Santa Fe, interviewed the prisoners, and issued warrants for the arrest of Richard Matthews and several other mine officials. Owen was busy coordinating with the marshal, gathering additional evidence, and maintaining order in a town suddenly buzzing with anticipation of justice long denied. Zara, meanwhile, began making connections in Redemption Springs. Mrs. Henderson introduced her to various townspeople, including several widows of miners who had died in the collapse. They welcomed her warmly, sharing stories of their husbands and offering practical advice on surviving in the territory. Through these connections, Zara learned that many of James's possessions, including his small herd of cattle and chickens, had indeed been taken in by neighbors after his death. They had assumed his widow, if he had one, would sell the property and return east. "Most city women don't last a season out here," explained Sarah Whitmore, a miner's widow who had decided to stay and run the small general store her husband had established. "They come expecting adventure and find only hardship." "I'm not seeking adventure," Zara replied. "Just a place where I can be my own mistress, beholden to no one." Sarah smiled approvingly. "Then you might just make it after all." A week after their return from the homestead, Owen found Zara at the general store where she was purchasing supplies for her eventual return to the cabin. "May I have a word, Mrs. Kaplan?" he asked formally, aware of the curious glances from other customers. They stepped outside, walking toward the quieter end of the main street. Owen seemed uncharacteristically hesitant, adjusting his hat several times before speaking. "The marshal has arrested Matthews and 2 other mine officials," he finally said. "They're being transported to Santa Fe to stand trial." "That's wonderful news," Zara said, genuinely pleased that James's death would not go unpunished. "Yes, but it's not the end of the matter. Matthews was just a representative of the eastern investors who own the mine and much of the surrounding range. They'll send someone else to protect their interests." Zara frowned. So my land is still in danger, potentially, Owen admitted, but there's strength in numbers. The other small ranchers and homesteaders in the area have formed an association for mutual protection and support. They've invited you to join. Me, but I know nothing about ranching. They're not concerned with your experience, but with your commitment to the land. Together, they believe they can resist the pressure from the big cattle interests. Zara considered this. The prospect of belonging to a community, of not facing the challenges alone, was appealing. I would be honored to join them. Owen smiled, visibly relieved. Good. They're meeting at the Wilsons' ranch this Saturday. I'd be happy to escort you. Thank you, Sheriff, Zara said, then corrected herself with a small smile. Owen, he seemed about to say something more, then checked himself. I should get back to my duties. Good day, Zara. As she watched him walk away, Zara couldn't help noticing the respect with which others greeted him, the way children ran up to show him their toys or tell him their small triumphs. He was more than just the law in Redemption Springs. He was its heart. Saturday arrived clear and warm. Owen collected Zara early, and they rode together to the Wilson Ranch, a substantial property about 5 miles from town. Unlike many of the smaller homesteads, the Wilsons had been established for nearly 15 years and had prospered despite the challenges of frontier life. The meeting was held in a large barn, with nearly 30 men and women present. Zara recognized some from town, while others were clearly ranchers from the surrounding area, their faces weathered by sun and wind. Most were dressed in practical work clothes, though a few wore their Sunday best for the occasion. Thomas Wilson, a stout man with a booming voice and impressive mustache, called the meeting to order. He explained the purpose of the association: mutual aid in times of need, shared resources for tasks too large for a single homestead, and united resistance against the encroachment of large cattle interests. The land belongs to those who work it, he declared to murmurs of approval. Not to Eastern speculators who have never set foot on the territory. Various issues were discussed: water rights, fencing disputes, the price of beef at market. Through it all, Zara listened attentively, absorbing as much information as she could. When the conversation turned to new members, Wilson introduced her to the group. Mrs. Kaplan here has inherited her husband's homestead in Silver Creek Valley, he announced. James Kaplan was one of the miners who stood up to Matthews and paid the ultimate price. His widow intends to honor his memory by working his land. A murmur of respect rippled through the gathering. A tall, lean rancher near the back spoke up. That's brave talk, madam, but Silver Creek Valley is isolated, hard for a woman alone. Before Zara could respond, a woman's voice cut in. Was it any easier for me when I lost my Jacob, Mr. Peterson? Yet here I stand 3 years later with a working ranch and children who don't go hungry. Mrs. Rivera speaks truth, Wilson agreed, and Mrs. Kaplan won't be alone. That's the purpose of this association, to ensure none of us stands alone against those who would take what's rightfully ours. The discussion continued, with practical arrangements being made for helping Zara establish her homestead, offers of livestock, assistance with planting crops, advice on various aspects of frontier life. By the time the meeting concluded, Zara felt overwhelmed by the generosity of these strangers who had so readily accepted her into their community. As Owen helped her mount her horse for the return journey, Zara found herself fighting tears. I never expected such kindness, she admitted. It's the way of things out here, Owen said simply. Life is too hard to face alone. We depend on each other, even those of us who value our independence. They rode in companionable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the trail, and the air was filled with the scent of sage and wildflowers. When will you return to your homestead? Owen asked eventually. As soon as possible, Zara replied. Mr. Wilson's sons have offered to accompany me next week and help with repairs to the cabin and stable. You seem eager to leave town, Owen observed, a hint of something like disappointment in his tone. Not to leave, Zara clarified, but to begin. Every day I spend in town is a day the land lies untended. She hesitated, then added softly, though I will miss certain aspects of town life. Owen glanced at her, a question in his eyes, such as Mrs. Henderson's cooking, for one, she said lightly, then more seriously, and conversations with people who understand the value of both justice and compassion. A slow smile spread across Owen's face. Redemption Springs isn't so far from Silver Creek Valley, perhaps 7 miles as the crow flies. Is that so? Zara replied, unable to suppress her own smile. A manageable distance for the occasional social call, I should think. Indeed, and a sheriff's duties often take him throughout his jurisdiction. The implications of this exchange hung in the air between them, too new and fragile to be directly addressed. Yet Zara felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. As they approached town, Owen suddenly reined in his horse, gesturing for Zara to do the same. "Look there," he said, pointing to a spot where the trail ahead curved around a large boulder. Zara squinted, then caught her breath as she saw what had captured his attention: a magnificent buck deer standing motionless in the golden light, its antlers like a crown of branches against the sky. "Beautiful," she whispered, afraid of startling the creature. "This land has a way of revealing its gifts when you least expect them," Owen said quietly. The buck held their gaze for a long moment, then bounded gracefully away into the underbrush. As they resumed their journey, Zara felt a sense of rightness, of belonging that she had never experienced before. Perhaps this wild territory, so different from the ordered world she had known, was where she was meant to be all along. The following week passed in a flurry of preparations. Zara purchased additional supplies for the homestead, arranged for the return of James's livestock, and continued building relationships with the community that had so unexpectedly embraced her. Owen was often busy with his duties, but he made time each day to check on her progress, offering advice or assistance when needed. Their interactions were marked by a growing ease and warmth, though both carefully maintained a respectful distance that befitted their circumstances. The day of Zara's departure for the homestead dawned clear and promising. As arranged, the Wilson boys, Daniel and Joseph, both capable young men in their early 20s, arrived at the boarding house to escort her and help transport her supplies. To Zara's surprise, Owen also appeared, leading his bay gelding. "I thought I might ride along," he said casually. "Make sure you're properly settled." Mrs. Henderson, overseeing the loading of supplies, exchanged a knowing glance with Zara but said nothing. The small caravan set off just after breakfast, with Zara riding Daisy, the gentle mare she had grown fond of during her previous journey. The trip to Silver Creek Valley was uneventful but pleasant. The Wilson boys were good-natured companions, sharing stories of frontier life that were both entertaining and educational. Owen rode mostly in silence, alert to their surroundings but occasionally joining in the conversation. When they crested the final ridge and Silver Creek Valley spread out below them, Zara felt a surge of emotion. The small cabin with its chimney, the meandering creek, the meadows now turning golden in the summer sun, it was all hers, a place of her own in this vast wilderness. "Home," she murmured, almost to herself. Owen, riding beside her, heard the word and smiled. "Yes," he agreed simply. The next few days were filled with hard work. The Wilson boys repaired the roof of the stable, reinforced the chicken coop, and helped construct a sturdy corral for the cattle that would soon arrive. Owen, meanwhile, focused on improvements to the cabin, fixing a leak in the roof, adding shelves and cupboards, constructing a proper bed frame to replace the simple pallet James had used. Watching him work, Zara was struck by his quiet competence. His large hands, so capable of violence when necessary, were equally adept at careful craftsmanship. He seemed to take particular pride in creating things that would make her life more comfortable. On the third day, the Riveras arrived with James's cattle, 6 cows and a young bull, all healthy and well cared for. Mrs. Rivera, a handsome woman in her 40s with streaks of silver in her dark hair, also brought a dozen chickens and a rooster. "Every homestead needs fresh eggs," she declared, helping Zara settle the birds in their newly repaired coop. "And these hens are good layers, though the white one is broody and will try to hide her eggs if you don't watch her." Zara was touched by the woman's practical kindness. "You've been so generous, Mrs. Rivera, I don't know how to thank you." "Elena, please," the older woman corrected. "And there's no need for thanks. This is how we survive out here, by helping each other." She glanced meaningfully toward Owen, who was demonstrating to the Wilson boys how to properly string wire for the fence. Though I see you have particularly dedicated assistants. Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks. The sheriff has been very supportive of all the homesteaders. Elena's eyes twinkled. Indeed he has, but I don't recall him personally building furniture for the Petersons when they arrived last spring. Before Zara could formulate a response, Elena changed the subject, offering advice on preserving vegetables for the winter months. But her knowing smile suggested she understood more than Zara had said. By the end of the week, the homestead had been transformed. The cabin was secure and comfortable, the livestock properly sheltered, and the vegetable garden cleared of weeds and ready for planting. The Wilson boys departed with promises to return in a few weeks to help with the first haying, and Elena Rivera left behind a wealth of practical advice along with jars of preserves and dried herbs to supplement Zara's pantry. Owen, however, lingered. On the day the others left, he busied himself with small tasks around the property, finding reasons to delay his own departure. As evening approached, Zara prepared a simple but hearty meal of rabbit stew and fresh bread. They ate on the porch, watching the sunset paint the valley in hues of gold and crimson. "You've accomplished much in a short time," Owen commented, accepting a second serving of stew. "Most newcomers take months to achieve what you've done in a week." "I had considerable help," Zara reminded him. "I'm not sure how I'll manage now that everyone has gone." "Not everyone," Owen said quietly. His eyes, when they met hers, held a question. Zara set down her bowl, suddenly unable to pretend that this was just a casual conversation between neighbors. "Owen, I should return to town," he interrupted, as if afraid of what she might say. "My duties will still be there tomorrow," Zara finished for him. "Stay, please, at least for tonight." The silence between them was charged with unspoken emotions. Finally, Owen nodded. "If you're certain." "I am," Zara said firmly. "There's something I need to say, and I'd rather not say it knowing you'll immediately ride away into the darkness." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous, just important." Zara took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "When we first met, I told you that love brings pain. I believe that I still do in many ways, but these past weeks have shown me that there are other truths as well." Owen's expression softened. Such as the fact that isolation brings its own kind of pain. That connections to others, to a community too. She hesitated, then continued, "To someone who sees your true self, those connections can be worth the risk of suffering." "Zara," Owen began, his voice gentle, "you've been through so much." "Your husband James and I had a marriage of convenience," Zara interrupted. "I respected him and I grieve his death, but what I feel for you is different." She met his gaze directly. "I don't expect anything. I know it's too soon and perhaps inappropriate. But I couldn't let you leave without telling you that you've changed how I see the world, how I see myself." Owen was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the fading light. Then, with deliberate movements, he set aside his plate and moved closer to her on the porch bench. "I've been alone for a very long time," he said softly. "After the war, I didn't think I deserved happiness, not after the things I'd seen and done. Being sheriff gave me purpose, a way to atone, but something was always missing." His hand found hers, large and warm and steadying. "Until you arrived on that dusty platform, looking both lost and determined." Zara's heart raced at his touch, at his words. "What are you saying, Owen?" "I'm saying that perhaps we've both been given a second chance. A chance to discover that love doesn't only bring pain, it brings healing too." The words echoed their earlier conversation, but now they carried the weight of genuine possibility. Zara found herself leaning toward him, drawn by a force as natural and inevitable as gravity. Owen's kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, as if he feared she might change her mind. But as Zara responded, twining her arms around his neck, his embrace grew more confident, more passionate. When they finally parted, both were breathing unsteadily. "I should go," Owen said, though he made no move to release her. "This is happening too fast." "Is it?" Zara challenged. "Or have we both waited long enough for happiness?" He studied her face in the gathering darkness. "You're sure?" "I'm sure that I want to find out where this leads," she replied honestly. "I'm sure that when you're near, I feel more myself than I ever have before." Owen smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. Then I'll stay, not in the cabin, he added quickly. That wouldn't be proper, but I'll sleep in the stable as before. Zara nodded, acknowledging the wisdom of this decision despite a part of her that wanted to protest. They were still getting to know each other, still exploring the boundaries of this new relationship. There would be time for greater intimacy when both were ready. They remained on the porch until the stars emerged, talking of their pasts, their hopes, the challenges that lay ahead. Owen spoke of his experiences in the war, the guilt he still carried for actions taken in the name of a cause he had come to question. Zara shared the story of her parents' troubled relationship, her father's descent into alcoholism after her mother's death, her own reluctance to believe in lasting love. Perhaps we're both a bit broken, Owen mused as the night deepened around them. Perhaps, Zara agreed. But broken things can be mended, can't they? Sometimes they're stronger at the broken places. He kissed her again, a promise sealed under the vast canopy of stars. I believe they can be, he whispered against her lips. I believe we can be. The days that followed took on a new rhythm. Owen returned to his duties in town but visited the homestead frequently, often staying for a day or two to help with the more demanding tasks. Zara threw herself into learning the skills needed to manage the property, accepting guidance from Alina Rivera and other neighbors but increasingly making her own decisions. The cattle thrived under her care, and the chickens produced eggs abundantly. With Owen's help, she planted a larger garden and began preserving food for the coming winter. The cabin, once sparse and utilitarian, gradually took on a more personal character, with small touches that reflected Zara's growing connection to her new home. In town, people began to notice the sheriff's frequent absences and his improved spirits when present. Gossip circulated, some of it kind, some less so. A few disapproved of the budding relationship, considering it too soon after James's death, but most, including Mrs. Henderson and Alina Rivera, watched with approving eyes as the unlikely pair navigated the complexities of frontier courtship. You're good for him, Mrs. Henderson declared one day when Zara was in town for supplies. He was becoming too solitary, too wrapped up in his duties. Now there's light in his eyes again. Zara blushed, but couldn't deny the truth of the observation. There was a new ease to Owen's bearing, a softening of the hard edges that years of loneliness and duty had carved into him. In her presence, he laughed more freely, shared thoughts he'd previously kept to himself, and dared to imagine a future beyond the next crisis or criminal to be apprehended. Summer gave way to autumn, bringing crisp mornings and the golden hues of changing leaves. Zara's first harvest was modest but sufficient, her pantry and root cellar filling with the fruits of her labor. The association of homesteaders helped each other with the larger tasks: harvesting, haying, preparing for winter, strengthening the bonds of community. Through it all, Zara's relationship with Owen deepened. They learned each other's habits and preferences, discovered shared interests, and respectfully navigated differences of opinion. Their physical relationship remained restrained, limited to increasingly passionate kisses and embraces, both understanding that certain boundaries should not be crossed until their commitment was formalized. As winter approached, Owen's visits became less frequent, the weather and his duties often keeping him in town for extended periods. Zara found herself missing him intensely during these separations, a feeling that both alarmed and exhilarated her. Was this love? This mixture of longing, joy, and vulnerability? If so, it was unlike anything she had previously experienced or expected. The first snow came early, blanketing the valley in white. Owen arrived the following day, having ridden through the storm to ensure Zara's safety. He found her managing well, the livestock sheltered, the cabin warm and snug against the cold. That evening, as they sat before the fire, Owen seemed unusually pensive. Zara, sensing his mood, waited patiently for him to share his thoughts. Winter changes things, he finally said, his eyes fixed on the dancing flames. The trails become difficult, sometimes impassable. I won't be able to visit as often. I understand, Zara replied, though the prospect of longer separations filled her with a sense of loss. Your duties come first. Owen turned to face her, his expression serious. That's just it, Zara. I'm not sure they should, not anymore. Zara's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying that I've spent 5 years putting the needs of Redemption Springs above my own. And it's been worthwhile work. I'm proud of what we've built there, but now, he took her hands in his. Now I find myself thinking of a different kind of service, a different kind of life. Hope blossomed in Zara's chest, but she kept her voice steady. What kind of life, Owen? One with you, he said simply. Here in this valley, building something together. You'd give up being sheriff. Zara could scarcely believe what she was hearing. Owen's badge was so much a part of how she understood him. The town council has been after me to train a deputy for years, he explained. Young Michaels has potential. With proper guidance, he could take over by spring. And then I could be here with you, helping to build this homestead into something lasting, if that's what you want. Zara's heart raced. Are you proposing, Owen Quinn? A smile spread across his face, reaching his eyes. I believe I am, Zara Kaplan, though I'd planned something more romantic than a practical discussion of winter travel difficulties. Zara laughed, joy bubbling up from a place inside her she'd thought long sealed. Practical suits me just fine. We're practical people after all. Is that a yes? In answer, Zara leaned forward and kissed him with all the emotion she'd been holding in check. When they finally parted, both breathless, she said, Yes, Owen, yes to building something lasting together. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. From it, he produced a ring, a simple band of silver set with a small but perfect blue stone. It was my mother's, he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. She made me promise to give it only to a woman of true strength and grace. Tears pricked at Zara's eyes. I'll try to be worthy of it and of you. You already are, Owen assured her, drawing her close. More than worthy. They were married 2 weeks later in Redemption Springs, with Mrs. Henderson, Elena Rivera, and most of the town in attendance. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, held in the small church and followed by a celebration at the town hall. Winter settled in fully after that, the snow deep and the days short. But inside the cabin at Silver Creek Valley, warmth and light prevailed. Zara and Owen established their life together, learning the rhythms of marriage, planning for the spring planting, and dreaming of the years ahead. As Owen had promised, Deputy Michaels took on increasing responsibility in town, allowing Owen to spend most of his time at the homestead. He proved to be as skilled at ranching as he had been at peacekeeping, his strong hands equally adept at delivering calves, repairing fences, or cradling his wife in the privacy of their bedroom. For Zara, the transition from independent widow to loving wife was surprisingly natural. She had feared that marriage would diminish her newfound sense of self, but with Owen, the opposite proved true. His respect for her capabilities, his encouragement of her ideas, and his willingness to truly partner with her only enhanced her confidence and joy. Spring arrived with its promise of renewal. The snow retreated, revealing tender green shoots in the meadows. Calves were born, the garden was planted, and the homestead hummed with activity and life. On a particularly fine April morning, Zara sat on the porch, watching Owen work with a new foal in the corral. The sun highlighted the silver in his dark hair, and his movements were those of a man completely at ease with himself and his place in the world. Placing a hand on her abdomen, where the first stirrings of new life had recently made themselves known, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a reluctant bride in a marriage of convenience to a grieving widow determined to forge her own path, and now to a woman fully embracing both love and independence, it had been a transformation she could never have anticipated. Love brings pain, she had once declared, armoring herself against disappointment and loss. Then I'll teach you it brings healing too, Owen had promised. And he had kept that promise, healing the wounds of her past with his steadfast affection, his unwavering support, and his belief in possibilities she had never dared to imagine. As if sensing her thoughts, Owen looked up from his work and smiled, a smile that still had the power to quicken her pulse. In that moment, Zara knew with perfect clarity that whatever challenges might lie ahead, drought, hard winters, the everyday trials of frontier life, they would face them together, stronger for having found each other in this wild and beautiful land. Love had indeed brought healing, not just for her, but for Owen as well. Together, they had created something neither could have built alone: a home, a partnership, a future filled with promise. And as the spring breeze carried the scent of wildflowers across the valley, Zara offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought her to Redemption Springs, to this land, to this man who had taught her that love, in its truest form, was worth every risk. Later that evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky, Zara finally shared her news. Owen's expression transformed from surprise to wonder to profound joy, and when he gathered her in his arms, his voice thick with emotion, Zara felt the last of her old fears dissolve like morning mist in summer sunshine. "A child," he whispered against her hair. "Our child." "The beginning of our family," Zara agreed, nestling against his chest. "The continuation of what we've built here." Owen placed a gentle hand on her still flat abdomen, his touch reverent. "Thank you," he said simply. But those two words contained multitudes' gratitude for her love, for the life growing within her, for the home they had created together. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the velvet sky, they remained on the porch, speaking softly of plans and hopes, of the child to come, of the years stretching ahead of them. And when Owen kissed her, there in the gathering darkness of their valley, Zara knew that she had found not just healing but wholeness, a love that encompassed both joy and sorrow, strength and vulnerability, past wounds and future possibilities. Love had indeed brought pain in her life, as it does in all lives truly lived. But Owen had taught her the rest of that truth, that love also brings healing, growth, and a richness of experience that makes every risk worthwhile. And as she drifted to sleep that night, secure in her husband's embrace, Zara Kaplan Quinn gave thanks for the courage that had brought her to this wild land, to this unexpected love, to this life that was at once harder and more beautiful than anything she had ever imagined possible. 6 years later, Silver Creek Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous small holdings in the territory. The original cabin, though still standing, had been expanded into a comfortable home with 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and the luxury of glass windows throughout. A barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings completed the homestead, all evidence of careful planning and skilled craftsmanship. Zara, now 30, had grown into her role as rancher's wife and mother with the same determination she had shown in those early days. Her auburn hair now held a few strands of silver, and laugh lines had begun to form around her eyes, but she carried herself with the confidence of a woman who had found her place in the world. Owen, approaching 40, had lost none of his strength or capability. He had officially resigned as sheriff 3 years earlier, though he still occasionally assisted when particularly difficult situations arose in Redemption Springs. His main focus, however, was the ranch and his family. Their family had grown to include 2 children, William, now 5, with his father's serious demeanor and his mother's auburn hair, and Lucy, 3, a spirited child with dark curls and a mischievous smile that could charm even the most stoic ranch hand. On this particular summer evening, the family sat on the expanded porch, enjoying the cool breeze after a day of haying. William was carefully whittling a small horse under his father's guidance, while Lucy sat in her mother's lap, listening to a story about a brave princess who saved her kingdom. "Mama," Lucy interrupted, her small face serious. "Was you ever a princess?" Zara laughed, exchanging an amused glance with Owen. "No, sweetheart, I was a city girl who became a rancher's wife. But Daddy says you the bravest lady he ever knowed," Lucy persisted. "Braver than a princess even." "Your father is kind to say so," Zara replied, touched by the child's earnestness. "It's the truth," Owen said, setting aside the whittling knife. "Your mother faced down bad men with a rifle, survived her first winter alone in the wilderness, and still had the courage to take a chance on a battle-scarred old sheriff." "You wasn't old, Daddy," William objected, always the literal one. "You was just 35, that's what you told me." 35 felt plenty old back then, Owen chuckled, ruffling his son's hair. "Until your mother made me young again." Zara felt a familiar warmth spread through her chest at his words. Even after 6 years of marriage, Owen still had the ability to move her with his simple, heartfelt declarations. As the sun dipped below the horizon, turning the sky to a canvas of pink and gold, Elena Rivera and her youngest son rode into the yard. At 50, Elena was still a handsome woman, though now fully silver-haired, She had remained a close friend and mentor to Zara throughout the years. "Evening, Quinns," she called, dismounting with practiced ease. "I've brought those herb starts I promised you, Zara, and Roberto here was eager to see if William wanted to fish tomorrow." The boys greeted each other enthusiastically while Alina joined the adults on the porch. She accepted a glass of lemonade with a grateful nod. "The association meeting went well," she reported. "The vote was unanimous to oppose the railroad's proposed route through Hopkins Valley." Owen nodded approvingly. "Good, that would have displaced at least 5 families." "They'll have to negotiate with us for a more reasonable path," Alina agreed. "We've come too far to be bullied now." The Homesteaders Association had grown in strength and influence over the years, successfully resisting various attempts by outside interests to control the territory's development. Their unity had proven to be their greatest asset, just as Thomas Wilson had predicted that day in his barn. As the children played in the yard and the adults discussed community matters, Zara felt a profound sense of contentment. This was what she had built, not just a prosperous ranch, but a life rich in meaningful connections and purpose. Later, after the Riveras had departed and the children were tucked into bed, Zara and Owen sat alone on the porch, sharing a rare moment of quiet togetherness. "Do you ever regret it?" Zara asked suddenly. "Giving up your badge for this life?" Owen considered the question thoughtfully, as was his way. "Not for a moment," he finally replied. "Being sheriff gave me purpose when I needed it. But this," he gestured to encompass the ranch, their home, the sleeping children inside, "this gives me meaning. There's a difference." Zara nodded, understanding perfectly. "I used to think that avoiding pain was the most important thing in life," she mused. "I was so afraid of ending up like my father, destroyed by grief. And now," Owen prompted gently, "now I know that a life without risk is hardly a life at all." She turned to face him, taking his weathered hands in hers. "You taught me that, Owen. You taught me that love brings healing, even when it also brings pain." He brought her hands to his lips, kissing them tenderly. "We taught each other," he corrected. "I was just as afraid as you in my way. Afraid I didn't deserve happiness after the war, afraid I'd fail if I tried to build something of my own." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the vast desert sky. This shared quiet had become one of the most precious aspects of their relationship, the ability to be together without words, each secure in the other's presence. "I have news," Zara said eventually, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Owen turned to her, eyebrows raised in question. "Dr. Barnes confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. We're going to have another baby come winter." Joy illuminated Owen's face as he pulled her into a gentle embrace. "That's wonderful news," he murmured against her hair. "Are you happy about it?" "Very," Zara assured him. "Though I think we'll need to add another bedroom to the house." Owen laughed, the sound rich and warm in the night air. "I'll start working on the plans tomorrow. Maybe William can help. He's been eager to learn carpentry." "Like father, like son," Zara observed fondly. "He watches everything you do, you know, tries to walk like you, talk like you." "Poor boy," Owen said with mock solemnity. "Let's hope he finds better role models as he grows." "He couldn't find a better one," Zara replied, her voice suddenly serious. "You're a good man, Owen Quinn." "The best I've ever known." He looked away, still uncomfortable with direct praise even after all these years. "I've tried to be," he said quietly, "for you, for them, and you've succeeded," Zara assured him, resting her head on his shoulder as they returned to contemplating the star-strewn sky. As the night deepened around them, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From her arrival in Redemption Springs as a wary widow to this life of abundance, not just material prosperity, but richness of spirit, of community, of love. The path had not been without challenges. There had been drought years when the crops failed, winters so harsh they'd feared for their livestock, conflicts with those who still resented the small ranchers' growing influence. They had weathered illness, disagreements, the everyday frictions of two strong-willed people building a life together. But through it all, they had persevered, their bond growing stronger with each challenge faced, each difficulty overcome. They had taught each other that while love indeed brings pain, it also brings healing, strength, and a joy deeper than either had imagined possible. And as Owen's arm tightened around her shoulders, Zara silently thanked whatever fate or providence had guided her to this wild land, to this good man, to this life that continued to unfold with new possibilities, new challenges, new blessings. "I love you," she whispered, the words still powerful despite years of use. "And I you," Owen replied, his voice rough with emotion, "always and completely." The promise hung in the air between them, as vast and enduring as the desert sky above, a testament to the healing power of love in its truest, most courageous form.